I cover the Western United States and Canada. So I'm going to be your host today. I'll be monitoring the chat box during our presentation. With me, I have one of my friends and colleagues, Avard Hart, and also Barry Klutz and Milan Babiak. And they're all Z technical specialists, and Avard's going to be presenting today. And his focus is on capacity management analytics. So we know everyone here is busy at the end of the year. We appreciate you spending some time with us. Just to give you a quick overview of what our goal is to kind of get an overview of the solution kit, some of the features of the solution, and how some of our customers are benefiting from it. We're planning on about a 30-minute presentation, but we also allocated an extra 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So I encourage you that if questions do arise during the presentation, please do type them into the chat box. That will keep people from talking over each other, but we'll also be able to pause the presentation and answer those questions as they come up because they will probably be relevant to the slide we're on, and we don't want to skip anything. So please do type them in the box, and I will be sure to bring to Avard's attention that we have a question, and we will be able to answer them. And that makes it a bit more interactive as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Avard, who will be presenting to us today. So Avard, the control is yours.
Okay. Well, let me give a very brief introduction of myself before we actually begin. Again, everyone knows my name now. It's Avard Hart. I've been on the Z side since the late 70s. It's been a wonderful journey, and recently, I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, I've had the privilege and opportunity to be associated with technology that is gradually gaining a foothold in Z. And believe it or not, Capacity Management Analytics is one of those new technologies. So it's a privilege for me to be here as well. As I go to the next slide, we're really going to only take 4 simple steps that we're going to cover, or 4 points in my agenda. An introduction, a little bit about the solution itself, about the components within the solution, and then we'll end up with question and answers, and a logical first step for all those that are attending. It begins with the idea that analytics has been around for some time. Analytics has been in the business for a long time, but analytics has not really gained a strong foothold in IT. We've done a lot of reporting. We've done a lot of analysis. But analytics takes on a different feeling when we start looking at, I need to gain insight from all this data that I'm looking at. So the technologies that have been used around the environment or around the enterprise have a new foothold now on Z. It's our turn for IT to do something different and be able to navigate differently when it comes to analytics on their system. Okay, so gotta love it, gotta love it. Hate technology sometimes. This next slide is going to take a little bit of time to discuss because it's important that we recognize that capacity management is important. Or, since it is a question, we can ask ourselves, is it important? And I'm here to tell you that it is extremely important. And we're going to cover each one of those 3 icons separately. First, we understand the complexity, we understand the cost, and we understand the expense associated with hardware, with software, and with applications. And so we use capacity management, and we suppose and suggest that we can use capacity management to better control that. Helps in the consolidation and reduction of costs with its software, hardware, or labor, the ability to validate the requirements for the servers that we need to have that are required to run the workloads that we currently have and those workloads that we're projecting. Reduce the number of software licenses, becoming very important that we control our costs in software. And finally, to help us better monitor and make sure that we're in line with not missing any of those service level agreements that we might have with some of our customers. In that sense, we've introduced analytics on the cost side. Nothing to do with the hardware specifically, but the expense of using that hardware. In the middle, we're talking about ensuring that applications are available when we need them, in the fashion that we need them, and they perform according to the plan that we've had them for. We've had plans. We have plans. We've been using performance information for a long time. But now we want to bring analytics or the discovery and the exploration of insight that allows us to make a change, that allows us to do different in the tools. An example would be to avoid capacity shortages that are a negative impact on Z or a negative impact on customers, their satisfaction, and the discouragement of consumers that they might have to come to our website. Now, it wouldn't be a problem if we were running at 25% utilization on System Z, but that's not how we run on Z. We run between 90, 95, 96% utilization, so we cannot afford any hiccups in the delivery of the service that we happen to offer. We have to have just enough capacity to satisfy our current business requirements and have the vision to be able to plan and prepare for future requirements and for other things that just come unexpected that we do not see or anticipate at all. The last bullet point allows us to say, not only can we look at the plain facts, but there might be options to where we can actually model what we see and recommend better ways to optimize what we are using, whether it's the hardware, the software, the applications technology. All this is part of capacity management. All this is the value that comes back to the enterprise when they invest in this technology. All right, next step is to talk a little bit now about the solution itself. So what are the requirements for a capacity management solution? Well, I've identified three on the screen, as you can see right here. The first one happens to be systems management. The second one is symptom investigation, and the third one is capacity forecasting. One, we use dashboards for system resource management, dashboards and reports. On the symptom investigation side, we can drill and we can hammer from general to the detail. We can create alerts for key thresholds, and we can detect anomalies that are going to impact or impede or cause harm to the current production environment. And last but not least, to be able to not just look in the rearview mirror or to look straight out the windshield, but we need to be able to look at what's coming down the road. But we don't need to over-anticipate. So we want capacity forecasting that allows us to meet our objectives just in time. Those are the requirements that we have for capacity management. Now, if you look at each one of those individually, these are very simple slides. And what you see highlighted in green and underlined are the functional attributes of this solution that make this such a compelling story to tell. One, we get the reporting. One, we get the dashboards. We have the ability to interact with the data in a way that we could not have done when we're doing static reports. We can personalize our own environment. We have a one-stop shopping place to look at things and to collaborate if we choose to view the data a different way. We have the ability now to analyze the performance not only of software but of hardware and as they relate to the workload that they might be hosting. And finally, we have the ability to make decisions, and we can use this technology to facilitate that decision-making effort. The next step of that, to the symptom investigation, you look at, again, the green underscore. Top-down view of what we see is a good way to start because it gives us a global picture of what we're looking at. But then we can drill to lower and deeper levels to gain better insight. I call that progressive interaction, progressive analysis. What we're looking for are those nuggets of truth, those nuggets of value that say, hey, this is what I expected, or worse, this is not what I expected. It's time to engage other resource. We can also, once we've seen it enough times, we can say, well, what if we just alert ourselves and say when we reach a certain value, a certain milestone, a certain limit, why don't we just tell ourselves that we've hit one of these? And therefore, we don't have to do all the looking and let the system do some of its own looking to be able to predict what any potential issue before they impact the business. The third side of this picture happens to be the analytic side that looks forward to a future, building a plan and then tracking towards that plan. The forecasting has become extremely important to just about everyone in the field of IT these days. How do we forecast our future capacity? One, we do it based on history, but two, we have to be able to ensure that the capacity that we're forecasting is available when we need it. And this is how we begin to do that. We anticipate, we have history, and then we go forward in making models that help us better predict and have the hardware, software, all the resources that we need in the mix that we need at just the right time. In fact, we can even do one step further. We can actually measure effectiveness of the model by doing real-time scoring. that are a result of understanding what the forecast looks like. Then we compare the score produced by that transaction to make sure that we are tracking against our forecast. So building a plan and tracking against it is fundamental in capacity management analytics. In a nutshell, every time I get to do this presentation, everyone always asks, well, where's the value? How do we accomplish and get what we need out of these tools? Well, one is we've divided on this particular slide two classes of information. Information dealing with system and workload characteristics, performance and trending, and on the other side, system optimization, prediction, and forecasting. They're kind of related with the slides ahead of us, or the ones that we've already talked about. But the real value is in answering each and every one of these questions, is they begin to develop operational profiles of the workload and of the system characteristics that define an application, that define a set of hardware, and how they should be driving together. Their symbiotic relationship one to another. What's driving demand on my capacity? Integral to Z is the workload manager. If we understand how workload manager is fulfilling his objectives and taking care of its customers the way he knows, the way he needs to, then we know that he is properly tuned. Am I achieving my performance goals? If I am, then I can assure my customers that I'm not hindering them from making their objectives. But do we have the unexpected that says, hey, wow, the capacity constraints that we currently see are causing bottlenecks. But what's causing the bottleneck? And what is being impacted? And how do we change that course? And how do we do that investigation? All these are values that are attributed to the technology. And finally, a very recent one that's become extremely important, anomalies. Things that you didn't expect, things that just crop up that impact your applications, different pieces of hardware, your network, in fact. Any and every piece could be a victim to a negative anomaly. And the ability to detect that is becoming very, very high priority. On the right-hand side, do I have enough capacity? And if I don't, do I have the option to move workloads so that I can extend the life of my capacity? But in so doing, what I don't want to do is I don't want to, one, create a bottleneck. Two, on the other hand, I might have to alleviate an existing bottleneck. All these things during peak processing. How do we not only do the investigation, how do we find that we need to do a challenge, and then how do we make that change? Can I better balance resource usage? The answer is yes, we sure hope so. With good information and that progressive detail, we can now better understand the relationship of our resources, how they interact, and how we can measure and visualize that interaction so that we can, if possible, even defer a capacity upgrade. By mixing and matching and doing customization and optimization, we can make that happen. Do I have availability? Available capacity to add new workloads. This has been a drive. If I want to do something new on my system, let's suppose that I'm investing, let's call it into either a cloud-like environment or a Linux-like environment to where consolidation of workload or consolidation of servers becomes something that I want to consider. Do I have the capacity, and how do I know how much capacity I have to have? So this is, again, forward-looking. How do I know that I have the right capacity in the right place for these new workloads and for any consolidation exercise that we might choose to do? Last but not least, do I really need to upgrade? Okay? Do I really need to, and when do I need to? What I need to know is that what's coming. I need to know what new workloads are going to do and how they're going to impact my hardware, how they're going to impact my software, and I can do this with some predicting and forecasting to accomplish that end. That's sort of what I can answer. Those are the questions that I can answer with this solution. Here's an example of a top-down investigation resolution. Just very briefly, the top graph that you see has a pretty much a straight bar. But our goal is to analyze top-down of capacity management. We can see that we don't have a problem if we look at this simple graph. But what you might not see is that this is based on a weak aggregation, and we have a date, and we have some times, and we have how the data is represented across the top. Now, what this is our big picture. Our big picture, if we stop at that big picture, we don't have a capacity challenge. But if we do what everyone will do when they get these tools into their hands, they start beginning to ask questions. Well, what's a week? We need to be able to get this down to a more refined date-time scenario. So we narrow the window. We narrow the time. we change how the data is reflected, and at the bottom thing you see we've gone from a week aggregation to a 10-minute aggregation, and by so doing we see that we do have, and probably have in more than one time, different spikes that are going to cause us grief, and those are the things we need to consider. But we get the opportunity to investigate in a continuous process to get to the bottom of a situation. This is a symptom investigation and resolution. An example of a client that did this very similar thing in their effort. This particular client, a health administration, they wanted to predictively manage IT, and that you see at the headline. And you see them in the bold green, underscored again, is that their goal was to manage mainframe manually, or change from doing it the manual way using spreadsheets, labor-intensive and error-prone. They bought this solution, and even with just the out-of-the-box reports and capabilities and the models, they were able to increase the ease of use and the productivity of all the people that had been involved without locking them out of some of their traditional uses in some of their methods of operation. A big win for the company, a big win for their current users. The second facet of this capacity management analytics happens to be with the optimization of capacity. And we look at this from a today, tomorrow, and beyond. We could look at it historically so that we get a baseline. So that's not forgotten. But what we want to see, we want to be able to appreciate that we have an integration, as from this top line that you can see, that it's no longer just Z. Our customers are requiring that we understand the enterprise, that we look beyond Z, because most applications now look beyond Z and have bits and pieces that are scattered throughout the enterprise. So our ability to do a single integrated cost-effective on Z and include distributed infrastructure information is becoming a very important selling point. I really enjoy the ability to manage the complete time horizons. I have the flexibility to whether I want to look in the past so I can understand the history, and then I can start looking forward into the current to see whether there are any anomalies against that history, or I actually begin now to predict into the future. I need to see whether what I've experienced in the past, what's changing it today, and how might that further affect us as we look into the future. Last but not least, on this slide, we want to jump-starting your time to value. The starter kit that comes with the IBM is an ease of use, we'll call it dashboard, we'll call it portal, we'll call it consumer environment, that allows the end users prepackaged in interactive reports that they can begin immediately to see the value, to experience the change, and to be able to appreciate the technology. There is, of course, as this last bullet said, there is an option for additional services if you want further customization that go beyond out of the box. And if you need some education to get started, we can handle that as well. Another example of another client. This particular client happens to be a Danish bank, and their drive was efficiency. They realized that there are a lot of things that they could do if they could do them better and do them quicker. So they went to the analytic model to say, how can we be smarter? In this particular case, you see underlined in green again, they wanted to enable smarter processing to understand why certain workloads, meaning we have workloads that are consuming more resource than they should, or than we expect they should, than what we have contracted with them to deliver. And here's one of those situations where their purpose was to use the functionality to identify jobs and applications that were likely to misbehave before they misbehaved, and then take action to get around potential difficulties and lower the risk of that having a negative impact. Very positive outcome for that particular client. The next slide deals with the ability to, again, what are we really talking about? Well, one is predictive. Predictive helps an organization to extract insight. We take it from current data. We take it from historical data. Then we map in new data that allow us to consider, what if we do this? What if we do that? Our abilities allow us to forecast, to ensure that we have the capacity just when we need it, not too much, and certainly not too little. At the same time, I already mentioned previously our ability to do a real-time score against current transactions to make sure our models are doing what they ought to be doing, to making sure we're tracking, making sure they're actually giving us the value that we need so that we properly reflect the future forecasts that our system might be having. And the actual report down here that you saw, the trend line here, actually is the forecast. So People always want to ask, what's that line out there? So the individual here that really enjoyed and took advantage of this is an insurance company from Italy. Their initiative was MIPS consumption and storage, a little off the wall, but it wasn't just MIPS. They had too much density tied up in supporting certain long-term business needs, and they wanted a better way to understand how much they needed, why they needed it, where they needed it, who was using it poorly, so forth and so on. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to be able to calculate the what-if on-the-fly performance and to make sure that they had sufficient capacity, not only today and future, based on their historical data. And part of their real drive is to be able to take things that were not in the data historically and do the what-if. What if we add this new application? What if we do this new workload? What if we consolidate onto Z-Linux? What if we do more zips and zaps? All those types of things. Let's get our handle on all those technologies so we can reduce costs, leverage our hardware even closer to make it ready just in time. I kind of summarized what we've just described in naming it a little slightly different title that says, you know, it's best of breed. But first of all, we have a consumer portal, top left-hand side. Everyone can come here. It's equal, or you can have one specifically designed for different people in your different communities within your company. Visualization is always better than a green screen that has just numbers and digits. Pixel perfect, it just means it looks good, and you can make it look good, if not better. You can also have the advanced filtering, if that is what you do, and that's what I do a lot of, to be able to narrow your search, redefine your hardware, redefine your intervals, advanced filtering to look at data just that you need. I need to be able to say, well, that's not exactly what I want. What if I want to immediately enhance and take a little different view of what we have? We can do that very quickly to go into an advanced analysis mode to increase your interaction and your value of your investigation. We don't want you to separate yourself from your current technology if you're leveraging technology such as Microsoft Office. We are integrated with Microsoft Office, so what you see, you can easily inject and do it dynamically into Microsoft Office so that you don't have to have even a slowdown in what you're accomplishing. The last one has to do with, we've already talked about, on the go, the smart devices. Everyone is using them. They're becoming very hot. They're becoming very actually productive tools so that you don't have to be connected, that you can be alerted, you can be part of what's going on as reports and alerts can be routed via email to your smart device, not only to you, but it could be a standard part of your procedures. I have district managers. I have store managers. I have warehouse managers. I have department heads that need to see something, and the best way to get to them is on their smart device. Best of breed. Okay, we're at a good pause point. Jordan, do they happen to have any questions that we could take at this time or answer at this time?
There's been nothing that has popped up on the chat box, but if anyone does have a question, please do type it in the box, and we'll be sure to stop again at a later point.
Okay, then let me continue. Now that we've had the discussion of what is capacity management analytics, what does it actually look like, ZCMA, or the components? We effectively have three entities. Function that we call collecting of data, extracting, categorizing, and storing it. We have a modeler that is responsible for the forecasting and for the correlating of that data, past, present, and future. And we also have a builder, meaning who generates the reports, who generates the presentation, and federates the data between different warehouses, so forth and so on. All added to that, we also have a CMA starter kit, which are the templates that allow you to become productive very effectively, very quickly. These are the three entities in the solution itself, the components. Now, how are they put together? Here's a great example of what we get with that. This app happens to be a template that has a variety of things. One, it has a drill-to menu to where you can go to ancillary reports that may be related to this report, so you can correlate some of your investigation. I can do extensive filtering. I can broaden my search or I can narrow my search. I can heighten the search or I can take it deep. by date and by time, and I can decide how I want it shown. I can look at it just in table, or I can look at it both in table and graphic. I can change my interval to say I went from quarterly to monthly to weekly to daily to hourly to minutes. I can go and go back and forth. And on the left-hand side, you see all the hardware that's been effectively registered with the solution that allow you to dynamically change the scope of what you're looking at. You say, man, I was just looking at this, and now I magically want to go look at something else. You needn't go any further. There are no additional reports that you need to run. From this single workspace, you could actually go through thousands of iterations just as you change the parameters, just as you change the variables. Very powerful facility.
Avard?
Yes.
We've got a couple of questions here.
Please.
So let's take them one at a time. Top one's from Barry. It says, is this just a Z solution, or can you use it for non-Z platforms as well?
Well, that's actually a great question. We're going to show that a little bit further on, but let me address it very quickly. This we will call it the hub, or the core traction point is Z. That's where most of your software live, but no, we are enterprise-wide. We do Z, we do distributed, we do networks, and all the other entities that you think that you might see or need to have that belong to your application. You will see that functionality continue to be added to the solution, to where you could say we're Z, and I can now profile an application to include the 15 different components and use that profile to be able to look at that uniquely across the enterprise. Great question, and a very strong future point for this solution to make sure we address all the needs of a, we'll call it an enterprise marketplace that spans the globe.
Okay. Next one is, what are the software and hardware requirements?
The software and hardware requirements. Well, I mentioned already that we need 3 pieces of software to be able to do the collecting, modeling, and building. The hardware requirements really depends, one, on how much data you're going to store, and that always is that. The starter kit requires a Windows environment to be able to install, but then it gets loaded into the other environment. It's not a very large footprint, frankly, to get started. A couple gigabytes for storage for your data, and you're off and running. Because of its behavior, you can also see that this becomes, I may have a modeler that is, this modeler actually is shareable. This builder is actually shareable, so that you install once and use many times for many consumers anywhere in the enterprise. Did that help?
Francois, did that help? Do we have him on the, let's see. Let's see if, okay. We'll move on to the next question here then. Is this solution an alternate to CA Mix? And if yes, does IBM offer a switchover from CA Mix for historical data?
Is this a simple switch for Mix? No. It's not an automatic switch. You turn the switch and suddenly you're using one versus the other. Our intent is not to, one, force that on anybody, because with years of investment in Mix or any other reporting tool, there is not a simple switch. The simplest switch, you could say, begins with switching the data, putting the data completely in DB2 and getting that data built by the collector so that it's available to the modeler, and then we go from there. But it is not a black and white switch that says you were Mixed today and today you're CMA. There is some labor that is required. Now, that aside, the components within, we'll call it our collector, the components within the modeler and the builder do have technology that in the process of migration that you can effectively use the same data that you've used historically while you're gradually migrating your overall environment to this new technology. So we do offer that bridge.
Okay, and I think this next one kind of might talk to a slide that we may have taken out, but Tony's asking if we have an architecture slide to explain the components and how we connect and gather data.
Yes, we actually did take out that architecture slide, didn't we?
Yeah.
The easiest way to say this, the components are going to run on Z or on Linux. Some of them are going to have to be on Z, such as the data collector. The others have more flexibility as to where you would want to run it, depending on what type of hardware and what type of your environment that you have, between where the modeler sits. And the modeler, for example, is going to have to be on Linux or Windows, and we strongly recommend Linux. The builder, which, in fact, if it be known, is Cognos, it can run in Z, Linux, or it can run on Windows. But in the solution that comes with this, I'll say the collector is going to be on Z, the modeler is going to be on Windows, and Cognos, the builder, is going to either be native on Z or in Linux. That's the basic architecture. And the starter kit gets built on Windows and then gets loaded into the Cognos environment for reporting.
Okay, and Avard, going back to we had a question about the software and hardware requirements. They were wondering about the actual CPU costs and required software, databases, STC, etc.
The database of choice with the solution is going to be DB2. That is a cast in stone at this point in time. The size of that database depends on how much data you're going to store, and I've seen anywhere from 5 to 10 gigabyte to a terabyte worth of data. We don't recommend that you overload it without some experience. There's a little bit of a learning curve, not with the technology, but with how to build the data and how to build the mapping. And IBM provides that mapping that is built between the data warehouse and the presenter, meaning the builder and the modeler. I don't know that satisfactorily answers your question, but in the fundamental sense, if you're running the Linux, we do recommend 2 IFLs so that you can have, we'll call it backup. If one fails, you got another there, and he will use them concurrently, but he also uses them as backup. The other things is I do have an ancillary report, and for the benefit of the audience, if they'd like to see that, I can certainly send that out. That gives a 3 or 4 scenario description of these are how the tools could be implemented, and these are effectively what's required to do that in terms of hardware.
Okay, great questions. I think we're good. I think Tom got his question answered. Thanks, Milan and Barry. Avard, can we go ahead and skip ahead to where you were at? And we've got about, looks like, 8 minutes left.
All right, well, we're going to have to chug a little faster. This particular slide happens to be our collector. And this is, we've already let that cat out of the bag. This is Tivoli Decision Services. And he's the gentleman that we use to collect data from the mainframe, from Z, and from all the different devices that he has connectors to. So that's what we use him for. The next item happens to be, we'll call it the forecasting capability, is in the hands of another element, which we will call SPSS. With its ability, you'll be able to use the same toolkit that you've been using to be able to look at the future based on historical evidence. And this is part of that solution kit. Again, that's SPSS. And I'm moving a little quicker because we are short of time. Here's an example of what that forecast looks like behind the scenes. The report generates on the bottom. The forecast is built on the top, as you would see it in SPSS. And then CMA takes the forecast, feeds it into the report structure, and presents this trend line. This trend line is a reflection of the model that was created by SPSS. So that's where our predictive models come in, and that's how the two are related to each other. And this is a learning model. This is a learning model that, based on data continuing to be loaded, the refinement of this model continues to improve. So you don't have to worry about a stale model immediately. You use it until your scoring report starts to tell you that it's not performing the way it's used to. Then it may be time to regenerate a model. But it is a learning model based on technology. Here's an example of Art of the Possible. Won't spend much time on this, but it's been used by several customers that are looking at, I am committed to doing something with consolidation of servers. I might be able to want to do it physically, or I might be able to want to do it virtually. Here's a what-if scenario that shows how we use this tool to be able to showcase and demonstrate what happens if we put all our servers, let's say, on ZVM Linux. What happens if we do this? What happens if we take this server and take off that server? All that is part of the art of the possible. The next slide is related to that. That's another art of the possible from the business side. There's a big call and cry that says, I want to map business transactional data against my IT data to show how the two match up, to see if we see any obvious anomalies, to see if we see that in this particular case we see a pretty solid mapping that shows a great reflection of how the business is using the hardware and how the hardware is supporting the business. In this scenario, we're looking at generally just the CPU environment as part of the starter kit, answering the questions of what partitions are we using, how badly are we using them, can we drill from this point when we see something that we don't like, and can we see in this particular, the lower right-hand corner, I love this bell curve that sits here right in the middle and says, I'm not sure what that is, but it goes really great for a couple days, and then it goes to the top, and then it disappears again. Either it's a very busy weekend, or it's a marketing program, or we have a hardware constraint. So the intent is to use the reports and the expertise of the people looking at that can detect that and say, that's not normal. What kind of delays could be impacting that environment? Workload Manager, you all know about Workload Manager. Very, very, very important component of System Z. To understand who your best customers are, what kind of service they deserve, what type of service they may be contracted to, and whether you're meeting your numbers. And these are visualized so that you can see when things aren't going the way you want to, you can do further investigation. This is a significant component within the solution called Workload Manager. And then to embrace that enterprise view of the world, we now have dashboards that talk about CPU, I/O, and the network. Whether we're doing it on the DASI side, we have DASI statistics. So we have channel control unit activity and queuing, as well as TCP/IP connections. And I think I have a future slide, but if I don't, I'll mention also that we can now look at Windows and Unix and statistics that they get back, metrics that they pull back from those servers, now can get added to the same dashboard so that you can compare like to different. Here's an example of a what-if workspace. I really like this one. This is Zips and Zaps. It's been a great investment for customer over the years, but sometimes we begin to take for granted what we have and neglect just to pay attention to what's going on. And the purpose for this particular workspace in display is to show these red squares at the top are effectively workloads that have been identified that could run on Zip and Zap, but they've not been sent there. So this intent is to show you the things that could be optimized if you either had a Zip or Zap or you had an additional one, and that's the what. And the if is, if I do put them on the Zip or Zap, how does that change my workload? Where you can see very clearly the red has disappeared. So all eligible work now is being done on Zips and Zaps. That's the use of this particular workspace. What you have and what it looks like if you were to move it to that Zip and Zap. The final portion of this has to do with in summation, we're very keen now on software costs. Everybody wants to know how to manage not just the hardware, but how do I manage my software costs? Where it runs, how it runs, what workloads are impacted, what workloads might be adjusted. Can I switch things around to make things more profitable? The answer is yes, you can. In this particular component, we actually give you an observed, we actually give you a forecast, and we actually give you an optimize. One to say what is, one to say what is going to be, and third was to say these are the options you might take to be able to shift things around, whether it's product suite or application suite or down to even IBM, non-IBM. We don't care where the software comes from. We're the ability to do that in software cost analysis, give you that analysis basis. Already mentioned real-time detection. We can do it for kicks. If we can do it for kicks, we can do it for just about anything that happens to be running on Z. Time will tell, and time will bear fruit of that statement. But we can currently do it with CICS, and this is one of those watch this space. On the enterprise side, we already talked about optimizing in System Z. Yes, we can, and now we're bringing into that more metrics and additional capability to handle the distributed systems, interactive workspace, and specialized reports, including environmentals, air conditioning, electricity, water, all those other things that you want to add input into how it's behaving against your application. We will be moving in that direction to be able to provide that capability. We are at QA next step. That was quite a quick run up there at the end. But Brandon, any quick questions, or we want to make it a wrap?
Yeah, Arvid, thank you for speeding that up. I know we're getting here on about 9:45 Pacific time. There's one more question. Let's get answered, and then we can call it. Is SCA like 4-hour rolling average, or does it report much like SCRT billing reports?
Well, it's built on the SCRT reports. You know, that's the fundamental foundation of it, but it does report on the 4-hour running average.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it looks like we're here at about a quarter till. So what we'll do is we will conclude the webcast right now. I wanted to thank everybody for being able to join us today. As far as some next steps, I'm going to be following up with all the attendees. Would love to get your feedback on the presentation, any more questions that you have, as well as your interest level in the solution. So again, thank you for joining us. I will be in touch with all of